Jagriti, so lovely to be here with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So let's start at the beginning. Tell me about how you founded your company.
Sure, so maybe I'll just talk a little bit about kind of my personal story and why I care about this topic so much. So for just as an overview, we provide tools and curriculum to teach computer science and AI to middle school and high school students. So we try to empower teachers to teach the subjects and students to learn the subjects. And so I took computer science for the first time as a freshman in college, and it was super, super difficult for me. I always felt like I had to work like twice as hard as other people. My friends, many of my friends also felt the same way. And this kind of affected our self-esteem for years afterwards, right? Because I think the way that you're taught and your education can have a huge impact on self-esteem and your sense of self-worth and how you see yourself. So that experience kind of shaped how I thought education can impact your self-esteem. And then, I continued to take computer science. I graduated with a degree in computer science and machine learning. I worked at NASA for a few years on the Mars 2020 rover. Then I went to business school at Stanford, and that's actually that's actually how I met my co-founder and CEO of Kira Learning, Andrea Passanetti. And so he also graduated from Stanford a few years before I did. And honestly, he kind of just sent an email out to the current students, and he was like, he was working with our current chairman, Andrew Ng, and they were kind of toying with this idea of just computer science education was becoming a huge need in the country and the world. They weren't exactly sure what they wanted to do with it, but they knew that it was a huge need. So I actually interned with my co-founder and CEO Andrea that summer, and then I worked part-time my second year of business school, and then I started working full-time. So that's kind of how the journey started, I guess.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So what was the biggest thing that you wanted to change about computer science education, and how did you do that?
Oh man, yeah, that's a really, really good question. So from my personal experience and from what I saw, I think many intro classes in computer science and AI are very, very difficult. Like the intro class that I took as a freshman in college, I do not think it was an intro class, right? It was they said it was for people who had never taken CS or never coded before. I mean, it was not, right? And that, again, huge impact on self-esteem. So I think one of the main things is that we want to make computer science and AI, and these subjects are becoming so important to learn, right? About just how the world works. We want to make those intro classes in particular accessible and motivating, and something that kind of builds self-esteem. And I truly believe these subjects are something that anybody can learn, and everybody should have a fundamental understanding of how they work, because it's a huge part of how our world works these days. I mean, it's hard to name a product that doesn't use computer science in some way, right? So I think just making it motivating and kind of building self-esteem is very, very huge. And of course, also talking a lot about the applications. So that's actually one thing that drew me to the subject, because I really liked, going into college, I really liked chemistry and biology and all of that. And then I realized there are lots of applications of computer science in those areas, and I can potentially help people that way too. So we talk a lot about the applications piece too.
Very cool.
Yeah.
What made you think that you could or should take the dive into entrepreneurship instead of a more traditional path?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess maybe I'll talk a little bit about why I decided to go to business school, because that was a huge pivot, right? I went to Caltech, a pretty small engineering school, and then I worked at the Jet Propulsion Lab, one of the NASA centers, and so it was a very different kind of environment. But I think what propelled me to think a lot more about education as a career was because JPL is a pretty good education outreach program. So I started to teach at schools and libraries in my free time. And then again, actually through that experience, as well as I also tutored kids living in mostly like women's shelters too.
Wow.
And that experience, all of these experiences kind of showed me, again, the impact of education and the way that somebody's taught on their self-esteem and just how it makes them feel. So that was what was motivating to me. After like 3 years of working at JPL, I learned so much, but that I just wanted to see if I could turn this this passion of mine into a career. So then I knew that Stanford in particular, they have some pretty good education classes, and I had done quite a bit of research on some of the education companies that came out of it. So, I mean, to be completely honest, I went into business school being pretty open, right? I didn't really know anybody that even worked at a startup, so I had a lot to learn. So I kind of went into it with the attitude like, I want to see if I can work in education somehow and help people believe in themselves through the way that they're taught. That was like kind of my high level thing.
Very cool.
And then I just started talking to a lot of people at startups and learning a little bit more about it. And then when Andrea reached out, my co-founder, I think the conversation with him, several conversations with him and my experience interning with him over the summer is really what motivated me, because I saw like he's also just a really good human being and I respect him a lot, of course, as a CEO and my co-founder, but also just as a person. So I think personally that's really important, who you surround yourself with. Like, it should be somebody that I really respect and I think is a good human being and all of that. So, and he was a great mentor as well. So that was a huge, and actually I will say I think he made me believe that I could do it and be a co-founder. Much more than I did. So I think
that's really
that
cool.
was a very honest answer. Yeah.
Now, your target customers are you're selling into school districts, correct?
Yeah.
How do you convince them to take a chance on you and this new technology?
Yeah. So currently our biggest partnership is a partnership with the state of Tennessee. So how that worked actually is we went through an RFP process with the state. So Tennessee, really realizes the value of computer science education, right? I think, like I said, it's informing so much about how the world works these days. So they want their students to learn about this subject, and for those who end up liking it and want to pursue a career in it, they want to give them the opportunity. So we actually work with the state. Like that was kind of how we originally got this contract. And so pretty much the state chose us as their provider for computer science education. So they're actually going to have a graduation requirement starting next fall, which requires every single high school student in the state of Tennessee to have to take computer science to graduate, which is that's huge, right? And more states are starting to do this, and Tennessee's kind of at the forefront of it. So we are their chosen provider for this curriculum.
Awesome. How many states and schools are you in right now?
Yeah, let me think. So Tennessee's, we have that whole state partnership with.
Yeah.
We've actually, so the state of Ohio has actually used one of our courses as well, one of our mini AI courses too. We're speaking to New York, California, we've spoken to Arkansas, as well as other countries too. So East and West Africa, as well as in Asia. So there's a lot.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Talk to me about your fundraising journey. What's that been like and how much have you raised?
Yeah. So our most recent round, our most recent round was our Series A, and it was led by NEA, New Enterprise Associates. So it was 15 million. And I think so far we've raised about 21 million.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me a bit about any metrics to show the scale of your company? Can you talk about how you've had sales growth or revenue growth or user growth?
Yeah. So I would say we've had about 2.5 to 3 million in sales. I will say I want to check that with the numbers just to make sure I'm still on track, and because we've gotten some recent contracts as well.
Yeah.
I think the partnership with Tennessee has been a big one, right? So that's a big contract that we've had, and then we're continuing to kind of add states as we go.
Very cool. What's been the most challenging part of running a company?
Oh man, let me think about that one. Well, I think, so for me, personally, I hadn't even worked at a startup before, much less help run one. So I think there's a lot of shifting priorities that have to happen all the time. We give a lot of importance to the feedback from our users, which are teachers and students ultimately. So we try to visit, I was in Tennessee 2 weeks ago. I visited several times. We're going to visit soon again, right? And I think it's this balance between we are specifically. Maybe I'll talk about a challenge between creating this kind of company in particular, where computer science and AI education is so new, and it hasn't. There aren't many other players in the space right now, especially those that work directly with kind of states and schools, right? So I think one challenge is that a lot of these teachers they're teaching the subject for the first time, which is if you can imagine, going into a classroom, teaching a subject for the first time that your students are also learning for the first time.
That's hard.
That's hard,
Yeah.
and that's like we saw some of these teachers teach with our curriculum in classrooms, and it was it was inspiring, right? Like they cared so much about this, and I think so you know, sometimes they might not exactly know what is needed, but they know their pain points. Like they know what's not working and everything, and so we have to figure out like how do we solve this issue that hasn't really been solved before. So I think that was kind of a long answer to your question, but I would just say figuring out what is most important to prioritize in the moment. And then there's always this balance between, right, we want to improve our product, our platform, and our curriculum in the long term, and then we also want to address the issues that our current users are facing like as fast as possible. And there's a trade-off between that, right? So both of those take time.
Totally. Who are your biggest competitors in the space, and how do you set yourself apart?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say we have two main competitors, at least like what we're hearing from schools and classrooms, CodeHS as well as code.org. So I would say there's a couple ways that we set ourselves apart. One is that we have a big focus on AI education. So I studied AI like in undergrad. I worked in the AI group at NASA for the Mars 2020 Perseverance rover, and our like Andrea has experience in AI. Our chairman Andrew Ng he's done a lot of work in AI education more for adults so far. So and then we're also working with several people from Stanford, like researchers and professors in Berkeley who have experience teaching this subject. So we're able to build curriculum, like AI-based curriculum for students, right? And that's not an easy thing to do, especially to build that kind of curriculum that is accessible and motivating for younger students. So that's one piece. Another piece is we also have video instruction. Our courses are actually designed such that they can be taken completely asynchronously if you want, which means we need to make them really, really bite-sized and accessible to everyone. So there is like one-to-one video instruction that goes along with activities and exercises and projects as well. And then we have a huge focus on applications too. But I mean, those are just a couple of the ways we differentiate it.
Now, AI, obviously a big area of focus, as you just brought up. It's such a buzzword right now, and I think everyone's talking about how to regulate it, the ethics around it. How are you looking at that as you're educating kind of the next generation to come in and use it responsibly?
Yeah. No, that's a huge focus. Actually, so I'll talk a little bit about one of our AI courses that's going to come out soon. So the first thing that we actually talk about in that course is about language models. And this is designed for, this course is going to be designed for 10th graders who don't have AI experience at all before. And we just get into it talking about language models and some of the applications of that. And there's a lot of ethical kind of concerns and issues that need to be thought about. So we actually give them, again, this is from Unit 1, we give them a framework to think about AI applications that account for the potential consequences, both good and potentially bad. So from the get-go, like when they start learning about it, we try to train them to think about these applications so that it will almost become a habit that they have to think about kind of what data these applications are using, how they're being trained, so that they're being built responsibly and ethically.
Totally.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So would you ever sell your company, and if so, what would it take to have that happen?
Oh man, I feel like I would need to think a little bit more about this one. I mean, I think my immediate answer is yes. So like, I don't think about that right now. Like I think we're able to make a lot of impact with what we're doing right now. And what would it take to happen? I think potentially if there's if maybe we see that we could potentially make a lot more impact, good impact, by selling the company, then I think that could happen. But honestly, it's not something that we think about right now.
Yeah, that's okay. You're still young. And speaking of that, what's it like to be a young woman in a very male-centric tech field, especially a young woman too?
So it's interesting. When I was working in the AI group before at JPL, I was one of like a few women out of like a group of about 30, and it was tough. But I also think it's so important to have mentors and people who support you. Like I I definitely still have a lot to learn, and especially in the beginning when I started at the company, I was like, I just knew it was something I really care about, but exactly how to go about it in a business sense, I had a lot to learn. So I think I've been really grateful that I get a lot of support from my co-founder and my team members who are awesome. Like, I think we encourage each other and everything, and also, you know, it's really endearing and motivating for me to see when we visit schools in Tennessee, right? Like, I get to talk to the girls taking those classes, and they come up to me and like we chat, and I think that is kind of what motivates me, keeps me going. But I will say, right now at Kira, like I haven't faced, you know, issues in that sense, because all my team members are really incredible.
That's great. That's great to hear.
Yeah.
Is there one piece of business advice or a rule that you always operate by, no matter what?
Yeah, there is, and I don't know if this counts as business advice, but it's going to sound simple, but it's really to treat people well and with respect and empathy. And I think, like, whether it's business or personal, I truly believe this, and maybe I'm privileged to have experienced this and believe this. I think if you treat people well, treat them with respect and empathy, then the right people will surround you and the right people will support you. And that's actually, I feel like we talk about that in our courses too, because I think one big role education has is, you know, I mean, kids are learning these different subjects in a very important time in their life. So it's important to show them that like kindness and empathy can go a long way too. So I think it can go a long way in business, you know, professional, personal. So that's
totally agree. It can be really applied to anything.
Yeah, it sounds simple, but I think it's really, really important to remember on a day-to-day basis. Yeah.
So what's next for you? What's next for Kira? Any exciting things down the pipeline in 2024?
Yes, so I'll talk about something we're actually currently working on that I'm personally super excited about. So we often get the question, okay, so do you teach AI or do you use AI to improve learning and teaching? And the answer is both, right? So I've talked a little bit about how we teach AI in computer science and our approach to that. So one thing we're working on now is actually using AI and language models to improve the learning and teaching experience. So I would love to talk a little bit about that.
Please.
So one really common feeling in computer science is this feeling of just being really, really stuck. Like you're writing a computer program and you run into an issue, an error, and then you don't know how to solve it. And you know, actually my co-founder Andrea put this really well once. He's pretty much like, computer science is a very unique subject because you're constantly interacting with a computer and there's a lot of feelings involved, but the computer doesn't care, right? Like that's tough. So I think this feeling of just being stuck and not knowing when you'll be unstuck is very common. So what we're doing is we're developing this AI, I like to call it Learning Companion, we're still figuring out the name, but essentially as a student is taking a course or a project, they can use this AI tutor learning companion, which will give them guidance so that they can become unstuck. So it will just give them enough guidance so that they can move on to the next step, but not give them the answer. So that's something we're really, really working on. How do we make sure that this AI product does not give the answer? Not only the wrong answer, because that would be horrible, and that can happen, right? So it certainly cannot give the wrong answer, but even an answer at all, right? Because we still want the students to learn, but we don't want this feeling of being stuck forever to prevent them from making progress.
That's a great idea, like the Microsoft paperclip on the side too.
Yeah. So I think that is we're going to release it pretty soon, a beta version pretty soon, and I think that has a potential for a lot of impact, especially because the teachers are often teaching this for the first time too, right? So I think they can also use if a student asks a question and they don't need the answer, they can also use this tool to not only improve their learning but improve their teaching.
Very cool. I'll look forward to that for sure.
Yeah, that's a huge one.
And last question for you, what would you like your legacy to be?
What would I like my legacy to be? I think this maybe ties back to the piece of advice. It's going to sound simple, but I guess I hope I can be somebody that helps other people believe in themselves a little bit more. I think education has a big role to play in that. So I think if we can create a product and courses and curriculum that make people feel like they have the potential to be who they want and do what they want, that'll be great. And I just hope I can be someone that's empathetic and kind and can help others do the same.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your advice and you being here and sharing your story.
Thank you so much, Kristen. It was great talking.